In a world where lights, camera, action are the standard, other forms of broadcast, especially radio, have fallen from the spotlight. But there is one frontier in radio that is still developing: internet radio. At Kent State University, one station is putting this frontier to the test.
Black Squirrel Radio is the Kent State University's radio station. It's purely internet radio, except I think it's also broadcast through the TV. It's all students, all student DJs, plenty of different shows. Each DJ has like a 2-hour slot once a week. So we have a vast array of different kinds of music and talk and topics and stuff like that. It's very cool.
Doug Fink is a senior DJing for his first semester at Black Squirrel Radio. Although he hasn't pursued broadcasting in his later years, he did get a surprisingly early start in radio.
I remember, actually, it's kind of funny, as a little kid I used to pretend I was on the radio, and I remember having like a little walkie-talkie. This is totally a true story too. Nobody believes me, but I had this like little walkie-talkie that I used to like play my CDs through and like talk through, and I used to think people were listening even though no one probably really was, because it wasn't even a radio, it was just a walkie-talkie.
Doug broadcasts on Black Squirrel Radio alongside Jen Yoakley on their morning show, Jen and Doug in the Morning.
Jen and I actually met a couple times before we really met. Like we had casual like crossing paths, kind of. We live in the same building too, so we can't get out of each other's hair. So I guess that probably contributes to us meeting and ending up as partners on the show.
Would you want to get out of her hair?
We haven't had any problems yet. I mean, we obviously have a radio show where we're stuck in a room for 2 hours talking to each other. We can't really get away from each other, and there hasn't been any problems, at least that I know of. Maybe she has problems with me, who knows. We don't really put on a big front for the show, so whatever you hear on the show is how we act. She's really funny, she's great, she's very selfless. I don't know, she's just fun to be around. You know, me and Jen get to go in there, we get to talk about whatever we want. We get to talk about whatever stories, like, you know, you watch the news and it's all awful stuff, but you know, me and Jen get to control the news for that 2 hours. You know, we get to show everybody awesome stuff or weird stuff or, you know, just kooky stuff or happy stuff. You know, I think those are the best parts of it. Just the fact that, you know, you're away from everyone, no one can really tell you what to do, and you just kind of have this feeling of untouchableness, if that's a word. But you know what? On the radio show, it is, because I can pick what's a word and what's not.
But the good doesn't come without difficulty.
Challenge with Black Squirrel is just getting people to listen, not so much because people aren't interested, but because everyone's kind of busy. You know, what people don't see is usually what I'm doing when I'm in the studio is I'm working on the PR kind of stuff. Kind of ironic because that's Jen's field, but I think it's nice for her to get away and get to control the music, and I get to get away and I get to do the PR. So I'm usually on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on all sorts of social media, trying to figure out different ways to get people to listen. Since we're not actually on the radio, like the actual radio, it's hard to get people to just turn it on and tune in. They actually to, you know, go online, and a lot of people aren't used to listening to web radio. I think what I like least is not being familiar with every single piece of it and being able to make the biggest and best show we possibly can, because we still don't know how to use a lot of the effects and a lot of the cool sound stuff. So we're working on it, and I think once we get it down, it's just going to be bliss.
You said during your show...
I'm trying to think what I was doing a year ago.
September 3rd.
Completely different things.
I was probably sitting in class.
Yeah, well, I was not on the radio.
We weren't.
I was much more sad back then. I wasn't able to broadcast my views and opinions all across Kent State University. Now I can.
That's a depressing moment.
I know, right? Did I say that? Probably the fact that you know, now you're on the radio and you kind of pretend that you have this huge audience, whether you have it or not, and you're like this big voice and everyone's just listening to you, and whether they like it or not, they're listening.
So what has he taken in from the experience?
I think I've learned a lot from being involved with Black Squirrel Radio, kind of in the same vein as any other experience. You know, you do something new and you just learn a lot about something you didn't know before. So I never knew what it was like to be on the radio. You think, you know, this is a fantasy job, you know, you get to be on the radio and you get to talk, and in a lot of ways it is. You get to play around and stuff like that, but it's actually, there's work involved too. You know, we had to go through our training, and we have to make sure we're not screwing things up, and you have to keep it interesting. There's a lot of work involved in keeping it interesting. Another thing that I learned from Black Squirrel Radio is that, you know, it's never too late to do something new. You know, I'm in my senior year, and for a lot of different opportunities I thought, well, no, it's just too late. It's really not too late. We're doing something sweet before we get out of here and take the world by storm.